with these with workers' education, and we were talking about the Affiliated School for Workers Incorporated. How was that organization funded?
Funded?
Mm-hmm.
They used to raise money. They used to have committee in every city that used to raise money to send girls to get uh, some degree of education in these schools. And they'd go to the wealthy people, and they'd have committees, and they'd raise the money. I remember Mrs. Wetmore was a delightful person. She was the head of our committee, very, very wealthy. But she was the kind of wealth that never spoils a person, that recognizes the needs of others.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of people we had to find, not only to raise money for the schools, but also to help us in our work when we had strikes and different things. And so the money was raised that way. Then they were chosen by recommendations from either the uh, Mrs. Wetmore and her committee would meet some of the girls, and the YWCA would recommend them, or the unions would recommend them. I want to tell you something funny. When we used to come back, we had different ideas, about democracy. The unions weren't too fond of us going there too often, because they felt that we knew we were knowing a little bit too much. And but I think that in the long run they did support education. So there was a contribution from unions as well as from individuals. And that's how then the work was gratis, given by the faculty members. See, there was no pay there. Maybe people like you that might have been working toward their last year in college would come. We had some of the college girls that used to come to help us and just loved it.
I bet they got an education too, didn't
yes,
they?
they learned a lot of things about industry that they didn't know before, because they learned about the class struggle and of course we don't use that expression anymore, but it used to be the class struggle in those days. I remember the Amalgamated used to have it as part of their constitution in the beginning.
Didn't know that.
And then they removed it later on. I think Sidney Hillman was responsible for that. And so that the unions were made up of people, the heads of the unions were made up of people who were educated people in the foreign countries. From different parts of Russia and different parts of Russia and Italy and some of them used to be had maybe gone 2 or 3 years to become priests and change their mind. I know one of our very dear friends was, when he became so agnostic and you could hardly believe what he said about the church, and yet he was very favorable and worked very hard to build an organization. And they would ferret out people who could help either in building the unions and in contributing to the affiliated schools. So, and with Jane Smith going around from one city to another talking about it, and she was such a soft, lovable character, soft-spoken, that she could win friends easily and get money besides for the school. So they began to open up branches all over in the south and the northeast and the southwest and way out in California and different places. So they had quite a large group. The one that turned out to be quite radical was Brookwood.
Brookwood, yeah. Which they closed down a few years later.
Because at that time, remember, the Russian Revolution had made inroads.
Exactly.
We're trying to ferret into various groups. I didn't know that the girl that I slept with, that I shared the room with, was a Carmen. We
In
used to call him a
1930?
Carmen. Yeah. Uh, they, they, they worked on me so hard that year when I was the president of the school that it worried Jane, for fear that I might take them too seriously. And because when they see somebody that's liberal, they thought, well, there's a potential
Mm-hmm.
for a communist member,
Mm-hmm.
But somehow they repelled me on a lot of issues. When I went to a number of their rallies, how they used Mother um, Mrs. Mooney,
Mm-hmm.
Mooney's mother.
Right.
The poor thing trembled like a leaf. She was given roses and come out to make a pitiful little speech for her son. Well, I knew darn well it wasn't for the son that they were raising that money. They were raising it for their own deeds. Especially when I went to California and met Mooney personally. I got a letter here with his picture and everything. I knew that although he was fooled a little bit by the communist himself, or maybe he was smart enough to use them. I don't know which.
I don't know
which it was.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the labor movement was split by I say particularly the needle trades. They would feel it more.
Yeah.
About the communist infiltration,
Mm-hmm.
because if they couldn't come in and take over, they would try to destroy it.
Hmm.
And if they couldn't destroy it, then they would bore from within. They'd change their whole policy and try to win you different ways. So they had a common terminology that they used to use. You couldn't help but realize that they were commies.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Their rhetoric was sort of tried, and you recognized it instantly. And one of them could work havoc in the local union.
Sure.
Now, what I didn't like about it, the amalgamated where I had my first fight, was they lumped everybody in one category. If you differ with any of their policy, you instinctively were a commie. Well, that wasn't fair. It doesn't necessarily mean that you said it because the communists said it. It was something that they used to throw in so that they could have something to work on,
Yeah.
So some of the boys were beginning to be drawn in somehow, but they weren't party members. They weren't even party fellow travelers. They were just people who were listening to something that might help them. The fight was funny. This is funny for me to say it because I've never been anti-Semitic in my life. Between the control of the union between the Italians and the Jews.
Really?
Yeah, when I was Chapman's secretary.
Huh.
Now, the Italians, in a way, were right. I don't know whether I believe it now that proportional representation was important, but I thought it was important then that each local, there were 7 locals, each local represented 2 votes. No matter how big the local could have been only 14 people or 1,400 people, and I didn't think that was fair.
Yeah.
Do you?
No, it was kind of like the Senate, the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
No matter how many people, you still get 2 votes.
Yeah. And so the fight was to get control, and Chatwin was on one side, and all my friends, my Italian friends, and me were on the other side. But what I didn't like is when they made a speech and they had a local meeting, they'd they would punish the person that dared to get up and speak for their side, their point of view.
How'd they punish them?
How they punished them? They'd go to work the next morning and Steinblock or Hickey Freeman or somebody would tell them, "I'm sorry, I got word from the union not to put you back to work."
My goodness.
So you couldn't get a job. You were blacklisted by your own union. You know?
Uh-huh.
Well, I didn't believe in.
No.
I didn't believe in it at all. So the result was that, again, I spoke out after all the Chapman's secretary. I had no right to take sides. I should have been a neutral person, kept my mouth shut. But I didn't. So they began to want to ease me out. They didn't fire me because the Italians would have made a fuss. I think they would. I don't know.
Were there more Italians at that time?
Oh, yes.
Jewish people?
Full of Italians. The Italian group was the largest.
Oh.
And about 3 times larger than any of the other locals.
Uh-huh.
And so the first thing they did was to remove the telephone. I used to take care of the switchboard. So maybe I shouldn't listen in. I don't know what the purpose was.
They started taking your job away from you.
They were taking my job away from me little by little. They didn't give me the correspondence to write like I used to write for Chapman.
Uh-huh.
They did everything. Finally, I used to sit there with my hands folded doing nothing. So I thought, what am I doing here? I'm not wanted and I'm not happy. And Bryn Mawr came along the second time, 1930.
Mm-hmm.
And I made up my mind. I'm going to Bryn Mawr and I'm not coming back. I didn't know what I was going to do, but and that was a difficult decision too, because it meant breaking with my family.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I did it anyway.
And that's when you went with the neckwear workers.
And that's when I went with the neckwear workers.
And you met your contact with them at the school then?
With the girl in the school, yes. Uh-huh. But,
well, we keep coming back to this education thing, and were there any other types of worker education groups that you became involved with over the years other than the summer schools for workers?
No, summer school and the YWCA. There weren't too many in those days.
What did the YWCA do?
The industrial department.
They had an industrial department?
They had an industrial department, and they were very good. And they tried to show people what was happening in the world, what the economic changes of war, what the war was all about. I mean, not slanted in any particular slant, as real news,
Mm-hmm.
And when unemployment came, of course, we were sold the idea that time was supply and demand.
Right.
I don't know whether it's still supply and demand. I don't know now. I don't know what it is.
I'm not sure.
Nobody knows now anyway. They can't control the economic situation like they used to at one time. And then I'd go to night school sometimes, wherever there were, you say, education. If there were churches who were giving some lectures, I'd always go to lectures.
Mm-hmm.
That was the main thing. And the lectures I used to like the most were the Sunday ones at the synagogue. The synagogues used to have such wonderful speakers,
Mm-hmm.
and they talk about what was going on in the world and what the world needs.
Yeah.
It wasn't just religious as religion itself. Not that it didn't have the religious slant. And I used to go quite often. So you're talking about education, that's where I went to all these classes. Even the church.
Mm-hmm.
I used to go sometimes just to see what type of education, what they were saying to the people.
Sure.
And then I got the churches very busy in the labor movement. That was one of my chief functions. Whether they were rabbis or Catholics. I remember Father Paul in San Francisco, a brilliant young man. He was very, very good with the striking of the department store strike. He used to have a special mass for them at 5 o'clock in the morning,
My goodness.
till the bishop stopped him.
Why?
Well, what?
Because he got so involved with it.
He said we're not supposed to take sides in economic controversies. You know, so,
Didn't want to lose any money for the church,
yeah,
did he?
they lose some money from the church. And so that's how I got into now. And the funniest part, I didn't get involved in the Negro question much.
Yeah, in education for the blacks.
No,
Not
I
even
didn't.
after you got to Atlanta.
You know why? Because when I left Atlanta, it wasn't going on.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to wherever I went, it hadn't yet started.
I see.
And now, when I was in Winchester, Tennessee, I was a stone's throw from Selma, but Selma hadn't started. There was I didn't even know what Selma was until it had started. Mm-hmm. When I got to Atlanta, it had already taken place, you know, where they slashed the places of eating, and then they just a lot of destruction and this, that, and the other mm-hmm. thing, and that was all over with by the time I got there. So I was in between different things. Not that I didn't want to, except that when I got to toward the end, I got very involved in M&B, a strike that lasted for a long time
in
Richmond, Virginia. Then I got involved with the NAACP and different things like that. Mm-hmm.
So you didn't work with any of the organizations then that were trying to get blacks the right to vote when you were in Atlanta or anything like that? The unions weren't involved with that?
Well, I tell you, I had an awful fight with the labor movement about the blacks one time.
Did you?
But the movement hadn't gotten to the stage where it was a protest, like ever. Uh-huh. They relegated all the black people in the back seat.
Yeah.
And the chair would make it a point not to see anybody raise their hand. And he didn't see it, would just burn the daylights out of me. So I protested one time. I said, why do they have to sit on the back seat? And you never recognize them, you never see their hand. Why can't they sit wherever they want to sit? Well, I was told, Miss Lucia, this is below the Mason and Dixon line. Yeah. Don't forget that. So I don't see how I can I couldn't help but remember it with all the signs that indicate here. And then when a Negro would say something, I'd pick it up mm-hmm. and help them, And that's the most that I could do for them. And when they wanted to build I said, all right, you don't want them to come here. Let's raise money and build a labor temple, a black labor temple. Yeah. Not that I wanted the separation, but I thought at least we'll have a place to bring the black people in. Mm-hmm. And when I went out and helped them raise money, I went to the black sections, which they scared me half the times of going. Not that I was afraid, but the white people say, you don't know where you're going, you don't know what's going to happen to you, blah, blah, blah. And then when I had the organization of the Rushton dolls, stuffed dolls mm-hmm. in Atlanta, right. Georgia. Is it still there, Rushton doll?
No.
I had a fight with the labor movement about that. They didn't want to take them in. I said, who are you going to organize? 90% of them are organized. I mean, they're black, mm-hmm. so who are you going to organize? 10%?
Yeah.
It was a constant row all the time, fighting for their rights.
Did you have any friends that felt the same way you did when you were in Atlanta about the blacks and helped you?
No.
You sort of
just Joe Jacobs.
Just you and Joe. You and Joe's been at the forefront of a lot of things.
Joe.
So
he was marvelous.
Yeah. Yeah.
I still have a friend, Robbie Joe Shannon, that lives on Peachtree Hills Avenue.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but she fired her. She used to love her Negro maid. She had her for years. Uh-huh. She was really a wonderful maid. And they were friends, very dear friends. My Ada May. See, it's a personal possession, my Ada May. And one day she didn't come in. And somebody said I saw her marching on some protest. That was the end of Ada May. She never had to come back at all. I mean, there was, I can't believe it. And that girl has never had a black person in her house since.
You were very shocked by that, weren't
I
you?
was shocked. I mean, I thought Ada May, at least she'd stick up for Ada May, you know, but
Let's see. Let's talk a little bit about some other things that you did, which were connected with the union, but weren't really a union job, like when you went to France for the Mutual Security Agency. Tell me how you got chosen for that.
that's interesting.
It's an interesting story.
It is an interesting, and I never would have made it, you know. They never would have given it to me.
Why?
Oh, well, because each one, they vie for these jobs. They call them junkets because that's all they make in this junkets, you know?
But you didn't feel that way, did you?
No. But Ken Doty and Agnes Doty were my friends in Atlanta. And they had opened up a school, a class, for mixed people, both black and white. Frank McAllister, who used to be with the Roosevelt College, he was the director. Ken used to work for the CIO, and the CIO at that time was outside the AFL.
So y'all were in different unions.
Different unions entirely. And I was with the AFL still, and Agnes and I, there's a certain kinship. I don't know, she had about 5 or 6 degrees. She was way ahead of me from the point of view of education. But she took a liking to me. And when they finally left the labor movement and they moved to Washington, they got a job with, they had a friend, Ann Gold, in Washington, that was with the ECA or the Marshall Plan or something. So the two of them were sent to France to be the representatives of the ECA, the Marshall Plan, in Paris. So when they were told that they were looking for what they called American productivity teams, that was a funny term to give us, productivity teams. You know, Ken and Agnes said, I know they'd never pick Carmen, never. And she's worked so hard in the labor movement. Let's recommend her. And they recommended Gibbons from the Teamsters Union, who was an old-time socialist. He was not a Hoffa man. In fact, I heard he was demoted. He's been demoted. You don't read about him anymore.
Never.
And he was quite a power in the St. Louis organization of Teamsters. And then Bill Ballinger, who was head of the CIO council, and I was the only AFL representative. He was, by that time they had merged, though, the AFL and the CIO had merged. And Bill Ballinger spoke a certain amount of French, pidgin French, if you want to call it, I don't know, because people used to be French. So the three of us were sent down. No, there was to be a fourth one. Agnes had chosen a black man, but the black man, the last minute, was taken seriously ill. He couldn't come, which was our loss.
Yeah.
Well, that's how we came to go. Now, what is our function? To encourage people to produce more. So
how were you supposed to do that?
So we backed, you know, when we found out what the productivity team meant. Holy Moses! Some labor people say, "Hey, we want more work from you. Let's find out." We went and said, "Let's find out what's going on." We found out the Marshall Plan was a good plan. It had, we stopped the communists at least from giving them the help that Europe needed at the time. That we did.
Yeah.
But unfortunately didn't trickle down to the workers. there's fraud in all these things by the
Right.
people who receive the money. Now, if the United States, say, I'm just using any figure that comes in my head, says we'll give you $20 million, France was supposed to put $20 million, match the funds, and together they tried to rehabilitate France, rebuild it, start the industries going, and so forth. So they had brought in all the tools and all the methods used in the system that they had. This, excuse me a minute, how they produced in America, the assembly line business,
Right.
mass
All the
mass
modern
production,
machinery and everything.
So we went to see those, and we kept inquiring from people, how much were you getting, and this, that, and the other thing. We learned how much they were earning and what the cost of living was, and made comparison what they could buy with the money that they got. How much did they gain from their free. We go to the bedroom shops. We call them bedroom shops.
What's a bedroom shop?
Well, it was 2 or 3 looms instead of assembly line. Still done that in the homes. They were earning about the same amount of money, which showed that while the production in the assembly lines have grown maybe 300 times more, the bedroom shops were still producing what they were producing, as little or as much as they possibly could under those conditions. So that we went from factory to factory. We went to meet the unions. The unions were torn asunder. They had different unions.
Oh, yeah.
And we could only deal with one that was recognized as being kosher, wasn't communist. And it was very, very difficult for us. So we got all the information we could, and we found out that while it helped rehabilitate the nation, starting industry, but we were teaching them how to produce more without getting more money.
Oh, yeah.
That's what it amounted
So industry was benefiting, but the workers were the same place they'd been.
So we'd meet with the workers. About the Negro question, I suggest you have a right to criticize up to a point.
Yeah.
I said, but we are trying to do something about it. What else could I? Well, we were at that time.
Sure we were.
And I said, it's not going to last forever. There have been some improvements, and there will continue to be improvements. But I agree with you that there's lots more has to be done. When we wrote it up, I think somewhere
I have a copy.
You have it?
I don't have it with me, but I have a copy of your report. Who did you, in Washington, who did you give that report to?
Well, it's the trouble. We didn't have, I don't know who really got Hoffman, I think his name was.
Did you ever hear anything from
No.
the ECA people?
No.
Did they ever respond at all?
No. Well, they did respond to one of our suggestions. We were going to meet with the press when we got to Washington.
Right.
When we got to Washington, the press had been called out. They had read the report. They didn't like it. And they didn't want it to go out. Actually, we praised the need for the Marshall Plan, not the application of it. And so we didn't hear anything more about it, except that we had advanced one plan that we ought to try to bring some of the workers to learn first about our way of living, how our unions function, put them in the trade so they get their trade know-how, the American trade know-how, and bring it back to their respective countries. Mm-hmm. They thought it was an excellent idea in Washington, so they put it in effect. I don't know whether you know Nelson Cruikshank and all those people, well, and Connors and the educational people of the AFL-CIO, they were all for it. They began, apparently they didn't screen them, and I was asked to help. It's when I took a leave of absence from the union.
Uh-huh.
It was in 1951, I think, or two.
So how long a leave of absence did you have?
I asked for leave of absence for 6 months, but I was back in 3 months. And when I got there, they gave me assignments to the point, they'd write it down every day. You'd get. First of all, there was friction between the AFL-CIO still, know.
So now wait, you were working for the education department of the AFL in Washington. Is that where you went?
No, I was working for the government.
Oh, you were working for the government. Do you remember which office? Was it that?
It was such a huge job. On Connecticut, I remember it was in Connecticut.
Was it like the Department of Human Education and Welfare?
I don't know whether it had a department.
Or was it the ECA?
Maybe it was
Mutual
ECA,
Security people.
Yes, I think so. And it's terrible that I don't remember. But
you obviously didn't like it very much.
I didn't care for it from the very beginning.
So they had you do what?
I was supposed to call. I was supposed to report at 9 o'clock. I'd report at 9, maybe before then. They gave me a desk to sit at. All of them knew each other already, and I noticed that the AFL people didn't talk to the CIO people, and I was very careful that I didn't talk to the CIO people. No, I don't think we had made. Yeah, sure they had gotten together, but there still was.
They were getting together. Yeah.
There was a rift between them. So they gave me the assignment, and I found that I'd have to maybe see 3 universities in one day in different areas. Take one plane after another, then go to the schools, then go to see the labor representatives, because I had to combine. I had to get the support of labor to give these people jobs.
Foreign people who came.
They were already placed, but to see whether they were placed and they were getting that our plan, if they were utilizing our plan as we had outlined it. We found out that, first of all, they gave them no money to live on. They put them in a university and they didn't have a cent to their name.
Oh, no.
Secondly is that the shoemaker would say to me, I'm a shoemaker. They put me in the clothing. And the clothing man said, I'm a clothier. I want to know how they make clothes in America. And they put me in a cement place or something. I'm just using expressions.
But they didn't get it.
They didn't get what they were supposed to get. Then I'd go to the universities, and the universities would complain because they said they didn't give us any money to how to take care of these people or anything. See, so I thought, oh boy. And then I'd go from, I'd wait. I wouldn't go back to Washington right away. The next day, maybe I was sent to Iowa or different places. I went to so many states I've forgotten, and the universities. And I was working, sweating, my head off.
Yeah.
And I thought, then it was maybe 3 days later, I'd go and bring my report, my written report, my oral report to the man who was the head of that particular program. He was the man who used to be with the YMCA. And, the YMCA was never liberal.
No, not at all.
And he'd say to me, and he didn't know one thing of what I was trying to tell him. Well, Miss Lucia, you have to be very patient. We don't work that fast, and things don't work that fast. But I said, these people are starving. They haven't got any money.
Yeah.
And this man is in this tailor shop, wants to go in the shoe shop. Can't we switch him? Isn't there some way of doing it? But we'll do it in time. So you'd get all this red tape all the time, no matter how often I went. And finally, I thought, I'm not doing any effective work. Then I'd go back to the day, maybe occasionally I'd have a day where I wasn't given an assignment to do some work in typing, in the office. I'd go in at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, they'd come in. 10 after 9, they all go out for coffee. They would go out for about an hour.
Typical government.
Yeah. And then they'd come back, and they kept looking at the watches. And about 12 o'clock, there was a great exodus to go out again. And they'd stay out not only an hour, but an hour and a half. Thought, what's going on around here? Gee, no, doesn't anybody work? Doesn't anybody care? That's the feeling I got,
Yeah.
And I thought, what a waste of time and money and effort and everything else. So I said, I'd rather work like a horse and knowing I'm doing something useful than to have that kind of a life. So I went in to see Crookshank. We used to have I got in trouble with the AFL, the CIO.
What'd you do?
What I did was, I didn't know. A CIO man wanted to go to Syracuse. He had a family there. So he pretended that he had an assignment in a university there. So he said, would you like to come? I had lost my brother-in-law, and he said, I heard you lost your brother-in-law, and he's in Rochester. When we're in Syracuse, you could easily go to Rochester, I thought nothing of it. I thought that was all right. It was a weekend anyway.
Yeah.
It was Friday. I didn't know I was supposed to ask the AFL man if I could go. I didn't. When I got to, no, he didn't tell me. Oh, yeah. We got to Syracuse, and he says, now you couldn't go on to Rochester. I said, well, aren't you going to the college? He says, there never was a college. I wasn't going to the college, he told me.
Oh, no.
Well, I felt terrible. I thought, gee, he got me in trouble. I wouldn't have gone if he had told me the truth. But he says, I thought I'd do you a favor and you could go to Rochester. Well, I did go to Rochester. But when I wrote my report, I didn't report. I had gone to the college.
Yeah.
So they called me in, whoever took care of the finances, and said, why didn't you go to the college? Well, I had to tell them the truth.
Yeah.
There was no college.
Wasn't an assignment.
There was no assignment in that college, and I didn't know until I got there, and then I went to Rochester. And the fellow got called in, and he got sore at me because I told the truth. The FFL man got sore at me because I didn't tell him. He said, you should have told me this wouldn't have happened to you. And I said, well, I got enough troubles of my own in the union. I'll go back.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you went back to the union even though the pay with the government was a great deal more than the pay with the union.
And that's something I want to bring up because that's a sore spot with me. A very, very sore spot.
Yeah, with a lot of people. A lot of women.
I don't know. I came across an ERA speech that I made. I can't imagine my making it way back in. I should have made a note of what book, but it's marked there.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke against it, and I can't imagine was the ERA
in the 20s.
About 20 years ago, was it?
Well, it was first came up in the 20s. In the 1920s, but it's been popping back up ever since.
I go and read it now, and I hear that I spoke against it.
You spoke against the
ERA.
The ERA.
And this is what I said. I've heard. Well, I didn't know what it was. Somebody I hadn't known too much about it.
Yeah.
But you see, when you're traveling from one place to another, and you had a lot of
misinformation, probably too.
And I spoke against it because it was done to take away the gains that women had made through the unions, such as shorter hours and sitting down and
Uh-huh.
and whatever it was that they used to use in those days, and I was horrified when I
Well,
read it.
that's what I said. There's a lot of misinformation that you had at that
Yeah,
time,
at that time.
and if it was about 20 years ago, a lot of those things like shorter hours had just been achieved.
Yeah.
So I can see
thought
I can see the problem.
Well, you come across it, but I thought I can't imagine you talking about against the IRA. I said maybe it wasn't the same IRA. I didn't know how old it was.
But you still were for equal pay for equal work.
Oh yeah, I always was for
Always.
that.
And
Now my fight with the union. See, after Zaritsky died, he gave me a $5 raise. He made it $95.
When was this?
Well, I mean, not when he died, but when he resigned, which was in 1950.
Uh-huh.
He said, I know they won't give you any, so I'll give you a big deal. He gave me $5, made it $95. When I got the job in Washington, I cried bitterly the day that he made his swan speech, Yeah. I cried very bitterly because he was an idealistic man. He was about 20 years older than me, but I loved him as a human being, Mm-hmm. He was a beautiful character. He did work so hard for Israel and for mankind. And the tears, I don't care who saw me cry. I cried at the convention. I was just dripping with tears. And I could see that the president to be, Alex Rose, kept looking at me from the dais, from podium, whatever you call it. And, well, anyway, they let him go at 65 when all kinds of resolutions were introduced to keep him, that they wanted to keep Zaritsky.
Right.
But they didn't.
Rose must have already been.
He had already been designated as the heir. Not by Zaritsky, but by his friends. Well, when I got the offer to go and work for this program that I was talking to you about in Washington, I was still a vice president, so I was invited to the board meetings naturally. And I went to the board meeting in Camp Tamament, and he asked me why I took a leave of absence. I said, very, very simple. I said, I can't live on what you're paying me. And he said, well, if I gave you $25 a week raise, would you come back? Well, $25 a week raise, I've never gotten so much in my life. $25 a week raise sounded, it actually made it $115, didn't it? $115. That was sometime in 52 or 53. Mm-hmm. I never got another raise until almost 20 years later. I ended up with 100. I got just one more raise, and he didn't give it to me. Another $15 raise. I made $135 a week by the time 1971, 74 came along. The excuse he had was that I was not the head of a house. The excuse was that I had a home. I said, no thanks to you. I inherited the home. I told you I inherited that home from my landlady. I said, that bought with union money. I said, what's that got to do with it? I said, some of your officers have 2 or 3 homes. They have all kinds of property. What's that got to do? The value? If you're giving raises to your people, you've given to them on the basis of production of what they produced and their ability and everything. You're always telling me what a wonderful worker I am, and that it was. If you read
I've read
the history of you find my name over and over again in all kinds of situations. And he says, well, I'm sorry. But that's the way you feel about it. I guess we'll have to look for another Carmen. He let me go. That was a signal. You can go.
Yeah.
I don't need you anymore. You know. Well, when the boys heard it, they thought, "Gee, how are we going to get along without Carmen? She does all the spade work, you know."
Yeah.
So they went back and he said to one of them, Al Smoke, who was the director of organizations, you take her off my hands, do whatever you like with her. So he gave me another $15 raise, which brought it to $130. And I didn't get a raise from 1951 to 1971, which how many years? I don't know.
20 years.
20 years. I didn't get a single raise.
I don't know how you lived on that.
And well, I'll tell you how I lived on it. They did pay me my hotel bill, but I still kept a home. They said, "You're not the head of a home." I said, "What do you mean? A woman needs a home just the same as a man, you know?"
What were other women vice presidents getting paid?
Well, the women got no woman would. They'd all grumble like I did, you know, that the men get a $10 raise and they only get 5. I says, well, at least you get 5. I don't even get the 5, you know. I'm talking about the staff now.
Yeah.
When you think of when I went to work, that the minimum wage was in the 30s. When I went to Atlanta, the minimum wage was 25 cents an hour. It went from 25 to 2 something an hour inside of 20 years. And how much of a percentage would you call that?
More than 200%.
They got a 200% increase, did they?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that was a lot of money, because it still isn't.
No, but you didn't get anything.
But I didn't get anything. And I want that too, because in my swan song to the union, I brought that up. Unfortunately, it's the last time they didn't have minutes that were taken on a recorder. So there's no record of it. I'll imagine the written record of it, but the ones who took the written record, they'll write it to suit themselves. And I wrote that I can afford to speak freely. I should have done this a long time ago. Because it's against the law.
I know.
I said, but they can't say I have an axe to grind, because I'm getting through now. But what I'm doing is I'm warning the girls to do something about it now that they have the law on their side. You know, they're just as afraid as workers. You know,
I know.
As afraid as workers.
That is the thing that surprises me the most about the unions.
Yeah, they were just, well, look what happened to the group that tried to organize in the ILG. The organizers tried to organize the organized.
Right.
And they were fired, and they were, the case went to the labor board and lasted for years and years and years. So that's the way it is. And the girls gave me a tremendous ovation. They got their answer by the ovation, but they haven't done a thing about it. Now, whether they're doing it now, on account of the law being so.
In 1970, though, or by 1970 and 71, it was illegal not to pay.
Yeah, but I didn't want to embarrass the union. See, I would have had to take it to court.
Yeah.
I didn't want to hurt the union. But now.
You mean the workers?
No, I didn't want to hurt the international. I felt the union is right, Alex is wrong, you know.
Yeah.
And the men, you know. And then the crisis came too, that when, when they wanted me to stay on, Al Smoke, who was the head of the organizing committee, when I wanted to go on Social Security, you know, you could only earn so much, and
yes.
It started at $125 a month. He said, well, if I call on you occasionally, would it help? occasionally it turned out to be almost permanent.
Uh-huh.
I have a record of them I'm going to give to you. And I kept how many days I worked. And it's too late now. You couldn't ask for damages now. I realize that now. But I wanted the record to show, especially about Alex Rose, who was considered such a righteous man and such a splendid person, that he could be just as petty a person as I ever saw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It amazes me that the unions treated their workers as
And
poorly
the
as
girls
the
would tell
industries
me.
treated their workers.
You know, when even the teachers at one time, I went to an 8th of LCIO convention, the national convention, and I thought, here's a good chance now to do something about equal pay for equal work.
Uh-huh.
You know, I got a resolution up, and I got the teachers and a number of women together from different industries in the caucus. I said, I'm going to introduce this resolution, but I only introduce it if you people are going to get up and support it. Nobody else is going to say anything about it. It's useless. No.
Yeah.
They wouldn't. They
It's
wouldn't
amazing.
jeopardize their job. That's what they said.
Sure.
Jeopardize our job.
Same kind of oppression that you got from.
But I'd like to, and they're still finagling. You know, they do it. Then the climax came when I really retired. Oh, when Al asked me if I'd work for 100, you know, says you going to get $125. Will you do some work for us? I said, sure. You know me, I'll be glad to. And later on, he said, I'd like to keep you. I'll give you another $10 raise. And you work full time. I said, I'd rather work for nothing than to sell myself like that. And I did.
Yeah.
And that was the most stupid thing I ever did, because I worked full time for 4 more years at 100. Finally went to $140 a month.
Good grief. Full-time work.
Full-time work. And then when it came to getting, you're getting tired, aren't you?
No, I'm just stretching.
Stretch. We'll finish this one and then we can go and have something to eat. Huh?
Oh, okay.
I found out that I wasn't eligible to what do they call I can't think of the word, but I wasn't eligible to the insurance because I wasn't working full time. I was only a part-time worker.
So you didn't get any insurance?
So they wouldn't keep me on insurance. What do they call that insurance that pays for a lot of things? Major medical. Major medical. And I blew a fuse.
I don't blame you.
After 42 years working for this, I don't have major medical. Oh, I raised Cain, and I looked up, and I brought, at the board meeting, I brought all the material, how many days I had put in working at $140 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not a steady worker. What do you mean steady? Well, you're a part-time worker, and part-time workers are not eligible to major medical under this. So I raised such a fuss that nobody would sign the blank for me, so I couldn't collect, you know.
Good grief.
So I made such a fuss that they finally asked a local to take me in. They'd pay the local weekly for what normally they would have to put toward me. Of course, now I got a notice that it ended May the 30th, so I have no major medical.
After all those years.
And of course I'm through with my contributory. It was not a pension. It was a contributory retirement plan. So that's how.
So
now,
did you have a retirement plan with the union then?
It was
did they put any
contributory retirement.
Did they put anything in?
Yeah, well, that's why they call it contributory. I'd pay 5% of my salary into the fund. As years went by, when I got to 15 years, I was supposed to get 15% of what they paid me. But you see, when you get a low pay,
Yeah.
you don't accumulate as much as the men do. In no time, they could accumulate a lot of money.
Yeah.
But
how much was? Do you have any idea how much a man vice president was making at the time that you were making?
Yes.
About $138 a week?
No. 100, I made 130.
130 a
Yeah,
week.
130 a week. Anywhere from 175 to 250 a week.
And this was people who were probably,
some of them I taught. I told
yeah,
you.
and probably had only been there a few years.
Yeah.
Well, you're gonna have to tell your story so you can help people that are fighting this.